Welcome to Bethel Equip. This big excitement. We're hoping that people continue to want to come. I think we got a few outside. Bethel Equip, just to kind of give an overview, this is the first class in a series for like 3 years of different topics and doctrinal studies and things like that we're trying to study. You've heard gather, grow, practice, and go. Gather is our Sunday morning, and one of the things as we hear God's word, we start leaking over into grow, where we want to be equipped. And so the grow step of our plan is usually being, we desire everybody's in a community group or something like a class like this that we put on. And the whole point of being equipped is for a purpose, and that's that practicing our faith and going. So that's a little bit about what the program is. Again, just want to make sure you know there's a camera right behind you so you don't knock into the... There you go. I'll give you some space. That being said, this class we're going to be talking about the doctrine of God. This is kind of like if you're starting to study in a big program, this is probably where we're going to start. We have resources available. You'll see a couple books on the table. They're in the Connect Center. There's a little donation box over there. We have Wayne Grudem's Christian Beliefs. Some of the resources that are on your paper are Wayne Grudem's like Systematic Theology, and that's a big, thick book. It's a great read, but it's a commitment. This one's a little less, but a lot of the same information boiled down. The other book over there is called Delighting in the Trinity, another very good book. We're going to talk about the Trinity in week 3. So just know those resources are available, and every week I'm going to try to give you additional resources. So if you look on the paper, you'll see some of the big resources on the bottom. You'll also see things like podcasts or other places you can go and dig in on some of these topics as we go through it. Sound cool? All right. So when you read a book like this, sometimes you get right into doctrine, and it's just going to look at what's going on as far as, what does the Bible say about A or B? We can go through that, but today we're going to be a little bit of looking at doctrine in today's context. Like, why does our doctrine matter? So before we get real deep into like big study, we're going to be analyzing the problem that we're facing today. And it's important that we take this step, because many times I'm just going to share, and I'm going to ask you guys some questions later. Our youth, and some of us have been in the church, we don't always know why that doctrine matters or what puts it into context for people. The world around us is chiseling away at our faith. So I'm going to ask a question. Have you noticed anti-church things in the world around you today? Right? Is some of that an echo chamber around you, what you see in the media, or is it with your neighbors? Is it with people in your family? The media definitely. We'll talk about that. It's out there, but the relationships we have, does our doctrine, are we able to talk about it? If you haven't noticed, who's seen like the rise of popular atheists? They're bestsellers, like the Hitchens, and what's some other names that are out there? Dawkins, Hitchens. They are on a bestseller list, which should tell us something. People are buying and reading it, right? And so we need to look at that. It's in our schools and our media, and I'm not trying to fearmonger us on there, but we have to have an awareness of it, and we'll talk about that effect later, but some of those arguments and things that are in our culture might affect us, cause us to doubt, or our kids and grandkids. So the goal of our class as we study the doctrine of God is to deepen our faith, for us to grow closer to Him, but it's also with purpose, right, to be equipped to obediently share with others. And it gets down to some churches are known for being really stuffy with this kind of stuff. We want to have knowledge, and knowledge that has feet, doctrine that has feet. We want to be able to talk with people about it. So we look at today's problem. I'm going to call it the shift. I would say people maybe a little younger than me and down have grown up their whole lives not going to church, have families that aren't in church. Our assumptions of what we can even say to somebody has shifted, right? No longer do they have Bible anywhere close to in the classrooms. The kids don't know the stories. It's not part of their vocabulary. So for us, we need to be so firmly rooted in our faith, we're able to communicate that kind of stuff that people don't speak the language. Does that make sense? Your grandkids, if they're going to school, in a public school, it's even less. They're not hearing anything that's supporting what you might be doing at home. And I'm going to ask some questions of you a little later in the class, and maybe that will help put some skin on this for all of us. But Gallup poll, which is a more secular polling, is saying in the last couple of years, 6% down is just a belief in God. We'll look at Pew Research here in a minute, which is more from a Christian standpoint. But you have to consider, what is the world replacing that knowledge with? And you're going to see a bunch of stuff. Our classrooms, again, are filled with one-sided philosophical arguments. They're only hearing one side. It's many times aggressively against us. And I put this up there in conversations with real people. I believe in science. Who's heard someone say that? Right? Well, I believe in science. They'll say that in an unqualified manner. Like, what do you even mean by that? I won't bring up like recent things that we've gone through over the last couple of years, but there's been some questions about, well, what is science? What's behind science? Stuff like that. So we want to talk about some of that. But when we talk about God, today we're not looking at the science so much. Out there, you're going to see things like the Ark Encounter, Institute for Creation Research. There's about 6 or 7 things that I listen to or that are amazing, showing you just historical evidence, archaeological evidence. All that's out there. It's great. It's really encouraging for us. But we have to understand that we need to look at some of these philosophical arguments. And if you pick up any of these books, you'll see that many times we start with these because we need to think through our faith before we get to some of the empirical evidence. It's a way that we can help people themselves think about it as we communicate. Outside of this, we're looking at the problem of not just that God doesn't exist for people, but there's a denial that he exists. And the other side of it is that there's an indifference towards his existence. People don't even care. I don't necessarily endorse this book, but it's called The Nuns. Other commentators in our community, we've talked about it in community groups. People don't even care if there's a God or not. And there's a shift in America. Pew Research said 28%, and this is all fresh stuff I pulled off, 28% of Americans have no affiliation with a faith system. 28%. That's a quarter. 1 in 4 people you talk to. 20% of them are self-proclaimed agnostics. 63 have nothing particular to say. They live their life without any consideration for their maker. So we think about that. Now, 17% go one step further and they directly reject God. They claim that name of atheism. And why is that important? 1 in 4, right? 28% of American culture can and will influence the church. They're going to influence our homes and our kids. Even inside, if it's influencing the church and your kids are involved in something, sometimes they come home with bad information. And so we have to have our ears open very much to hear it. So again, things have changed over time. There's this historical shift. So the whole point of this class, putting like doctrine, putting some feet on our doctrine is, let's say you're having a conversation, and this has probably happened to you. You're talking with somebody, a family member, a coworker, lunch, having a cup of coffee. And whatever the topic is, they're sharing with you. Why do they share with us, right? Because we're listening, we care, we love them, and we know that this is now a spiritual issue, right? Whatever they're going through is a spiritual issue, and we offer to pray for them. When we offer to pray for them, what sometimes happens? There's a silence. What does that silence represent? It represents that divide. They don't know what you're doing. That's at best. You might then have someone actually tell you, oh, thank you, kind of dismiss it. That's happened. Then it gets more aggressive. People who, and I know I'm at the firehouse, police station. I don't believe those fairy tales. Leave that stuff to yourself. A little more open in the firehouse. You see the true person. Probably same thing at the police station. And how do you respond to someone like that? And that's where our doctrine, not knowing our doctrine is. I'm going to ask this question right now. You've got papers I handed out. If you need a pen, I've got them. I'm one of your neighbors who doesn't know anything. Why do you believe in God? Then put yourself on the spot. And I can encourage you this week to write this out for yourself. Why do you believe in God? I've asked, I had some captured high school kids in my van for a ride to Wisconsin. Asked that question. Stumped. I asked a very bright 24-year-old within our community here, and he had a Sunday school answer. It's good. Well, Jesus died for me. I don't know what that means. I'm your neighbor. Why do you believe that he's God? Why do you? So there's more to that question, and we've seen people get stumped by it. I asked the same question in other classes. Well, then what is the gospel? If you can't answer the question, why do I believe in God, and then you really can't articulate what the gospel is in that, then we wonder why we're not compelling to our own kids. So it's very important for us. I have I have no hair. There's some gray hair. We have to be teaching our kids in a way that it's going to be compelling even within the household of God. So we're going to look at some of the views. Again, we're examining the problem before we get into God's existence. Atheism. It's wide across the screen for a reason. It's a very broad set of beliefs. There is not a denomination of atheists, right? Sometimes we can group people. So when you're talking with somebody and you're seeing someone who claims to not believe God, every atheist is going to have a different reason why they are an atheist. They've either been taught by someone and just fully accepted what that answer was, a professor at school, maybe something in the popular culture. Believe it or not, there's a ton of TikToks and different videos out there that kids are watching. There's aggressive atheists trying to promote what they believe. There are people who are not aggressive against the faith, and these are kind of like atheist unicorns for me. There are people who have, I've talked with a guy who has thought through all of this. And for anyone in today's culture to have really thought through something to be able to have a conversation, that's rare. But there's questions that we have to be able to hear someone on why they would be an atheist. There's other people, those new atheists, Dawkins, Hitchens, all those people, they see religion and Christianity specifically. They see us as hindering human progress. They look at all the atrocities in history where someone raised the Christian flag. What do we have? Like you can look at the Crusades, how the church responded to slavery in America, how the church in Germany didn't respond to the Nazis. All those things, they can look at us and just say, yeah, they'll make arguments towards us. We need to understand a lot of that history, and we're responsible to know that. Another person in the atheistic camp that you might meet, and I know some of you have heard the term, but who's not heard the term deconstructed? It's a very trendy thing right now. A lot of people have deconstructed their faith. So you'll find people who had experience in the church. Maybe they were born and raised in it. They had bad church experience, church hurts. They found the church lacking, and they've left the faith. They will sow doubt. They are on a mission now to bring people along with them. All right, they didn't like the church, and now they're looking for a cheerleading squad to come with them, and they're very happy to do that for you.
There's a guy that went here that's
Yeah, it's affected. I've deconstructed. Now the other side of that is there's Christians who are still believers, but because it's a trendy topic, they'll say, "Oh, I've deconstructed, and I still believe." But I had to really deconstruct my faith.
But this was someone really on fire for the Lord, and then it's right. When you're weak in faith, you wonder what. Right. And
and I'm going to posit today that if you don't know the basics of your doctrine, you're going to fall right to that.
Right.
In many cases,
this is somebody you would think would never fall.
Yeah.
Right.
I know. I'm with you, and that's something and I'm glad you bring it up because in our church these things happen. Outside of atheism, you're going to see deism. Now, this says, "In nature's God we trust." It looks pretty new agey to me. This is not an old icon. I took this off what it looks to me to be a brand new website. Right? This brand new website. Deism is just the idea that there is there is a God. He guessed in this case it's nature. And you're going to see that there's a very wide view. You're going to see all over, as we talk about later today, everyone, it's up in the air. You say, "Oh, I believe in a God, but have no standard," you're going to see that. This is the kind of God that sets things in motion and doesn't intervene. Adina and I were on a wonderful date on the Chicago water taxi, and some guy, interrupted us and wanted to talk, and then we start talking, go to spiritual things, and we're trying to go right to the spiritual. And he says every morning he wakes up and thanks the sun, and then he thanks the sun's creator. And this guy's being very open.
S-U-N.
S-U-N, not the I. And so, in that conversation, I say, "Hey, bud, you can skip that first step." And we're trying to go down that road, but it's out there. People really do. We have people that have left this church that are into rock healing and a lot of that kind of spiritual stuff, And so they'll acknowledge there's a God, but there's just no standard there. The next one we have up here is, you see these pictures of a Roman god. I pull this up in deism. Again, I'm still kind of staying within that Christian mindset. I pull these up because we have people who believe in a God who is like us. And if you look at the Roman gods, and no one really worships them today, but you'll see these gods have all sorts of improprieties and fickleness. They're people. Someone made a God who was like them. You have to be careful to listen to that. If you look into Mormonism, you look into Islam, there's a God like us there. You can boil that theology down pretty quick. And a lot of times you can show someone that. So just keep that out there. The next one, again, really in the Christian faith, moralistic therapeutic deism. Can't say that very fast. If one of those nuns, in that big atheistic culture in America does happen to believe in a God, this is probably the God in their mind they believe in. This distant figure, he's not really involved in your life, and he wants something really good for you. And you can see how that theology can snowball into all sorts of problems. It places the person at the center. I stole this checklist off of somebody's definition site for it, but a God who exists, he wants people to be good, nice, and fair. Right? That's nice. And the goal is a happy life and to feel good about yourself. That sounds like the spirit of the age. Everyone goes to heaven when they die. Completely ignoring the ideas of the last will be first, the first will be last, throwing our crowns before our king's feet when we see him. It's all really about you. It becomes a very one-sided relationship when it comes to their faith. It's only when God needs to bail you out do you pray to him. All right, so you think about that. In other, outside of the Christian circles or the Western American circles, I have a neighbor who has shrines in his house with a bunch of little statues. I mean, he has a statue for everything. There's other religions and cults out there, and we don't have time to delve into all of those. But when you look at those gods or those other faith systems, you're going to see it's really, all those little deities are there to serve a purpose in that person's life. It's all about me in the center. That God is... what I term it the carnal twist. All those gods serve me in some way, and I can cheat on this and use Islam as an example. Why does a young man strap on a vest and blow something up? And honestly, it's because he's going to gain some kind of sexual favor in the afterlife. Like, those are the kind of carnal twists that we'll see, and you'll see it in other Christian cults and things. You have to look for that carnal twist. I say you have to have your ears open, right? You have to... remember the picture. Every time you see one of these little hounds, you have to have your ears open. Otherwise, we just walk around with them flopping everywhere. Keep that in mind. A lot of false gods out there. Part of that conversation, though, when someone does, in that conversation, tell you they don't believe, or why would you believe in God? How about this question? Why are you an atheist? Why don't you believe? Why wouldn't you believe there's a God? I've asked this question in a group of old men you've seen those clutches of guys at the Dunkin' Donuts or whatever. I used to sit with a bunch of guys 30 years my senior. I could ask that question and then let the sparks fly and start going down and have conversations with them. And it can bear fruit. You can establish relationships with people as you ask them that question. Why are you an atheist? And you're going to find that if you don't have a good argument for why you believe God exists, there's a good chance they don't really have a reason for their belief. And we put flags down. So we need to know our side so that we can help them get out of that mess. We'll move on now a little bit. In their class, we're trying to acknowledge that we don't have any silver bullets when it comes to the arguments we're going to make today. But we're also going to sow seeds of doubt in other people's belief systems if they are aggressively atheistic. And I use that silver bullet. I kind of stole that. There's a guy named J. Warner Wallace. He's a former cop. He has a book called Cold Case Christianity. And this is where Doctrine gets into apologetics a little bit. But he speaks of the evidences that we're going to talk about today is all pointing towards something. If an atheist doesn't like one of the arguments, he has 6 or 7 more thoughtful arguments that he has to reject. And that's okay. Not all these arguments are perfect. So we don't want to, and I used to not ascribe to a lot of this. But as I've learned, when you have all that science that I kind of breezed over earlier, all of these arguments, and then our experiences ourselves, all of this makes a very strong case for what we can believe. So we're going to examine some of these solid, logical, philosophical methods for God's existence. And we're going to jump right into it, all right? But just remember, none of this is heady stuff. We don't just read this like we do the Sunday paper, right? This is stuff you have to think on. How many people have never heard of the cosmological argument? No? I see a couple heads shaking no. All right. We're going to go through these arguments, and you'll find them right in your theology books. You'll find them in philosophy books. This is a common language that we can speak with people. We operate with a presumption today that we're not going to even bring a lot of Bible out. We can do that for ourselves, but in here we just want to get the idea that we communicate that a God exists. If our neighbor doesn't know God, a Bible story doesn't help him. So we have to show him that God exists, and we can still stand the Bible and read God's scripture. His word will not return void, but in many cases when you have a relationship with somebody, you may have to talk through some of this stuff. And you don't have to use this textbook language to do it either. You can really make this your own. Thomas Aquinas in the 1200s, he's the guy responsible for this. The argument is expressed, and I'm going to say that these arguments, there's whole books written, lectures, arguments on all those topics. Like you could fill this room with it. All that comes to philosophical math down to this statement. We've reduced it down to its essentials. It says everything that exists has a cause. Since the universe exists, it has a cause, and God is that cause. These are the various ways we express that, and we'll talk through them a little bit. And again, philosophical math. This one's not so bad. The next one's really bad. So just remember that these statements, there's a lot to them, and you have to really think through them. But motion, everyone remembers their high school classes. An object at rest remains at rest until acted upon by another force. Really, that's kind of the thing. Everything's in motion, and something had to start it. In philosophy, they'll talk about the idea that there can't be an infinite regress. It can't just always be repeating for infinity. There's always a previous belief. That plays out in modern science. Not that long ago, the consensus in the science community was that the universe was eternal. And the Bible said there was a creation. And, oh, well, you Christians are dumb. That was the academic side of these things. Well, we put telescopes in space and we look around and we say, guess what? There was a Big Bang. Everything points towards the middle somewhere and it's still accelerating. Really cool science stuff. The Bible was proven right and that's never acknowledged. But something, Big Bang, someone had to start that Big Bang. God set it in motion. That's the kind of the issue with this argument. Causation. Start getting a little more heady again. Every effect has a cause and every cause is the effect of a prior cause. There must be initial cause or there would be an infinite regress again. Same thing, but using the words of cause and effect to describe it. Contingency. This one, again, you can spend a lot of time thinking on this. You have to read it a number of times, or at least I do because I'm not that bright. But everything in the universe exists contingently, meaning that it could exist or it could not exist, which would mean that there had to be something that always existed to cause that thing. We call that God. And we call God a necessary being. And so that's a term you should remember is that God is a necessary being. All these arguments, why does that matter? There is something that necessitated everything around us, and we would say that is God. Now, we're not getting to the God of the Bible yet, but we're just saying there was something to begin. I said this started in the 1200s. Well, the Kalam cosmological argument is a little more modern now that we have more science, right? We said, well, the universe began to exist. We proved that. The universe existed. It must have a cause. That cause must be outside of time and space because we know time and space is tied to that creation moment. Therefore, God is outside of time and space, and it means that he exists. And that gets into speaking to some of our attributes of God when we look at it. So all these arguments, this is just one philosophical argument, but you can read on these things and start to develop modern day language around it. But it really gets into the idea of, you can contrast this to an attribute of God, and that's what we're going to be studying here. One of the things we'll see out of this argument is aseity. I wrote that term down on there. You can look for articles on it. You can read this. But that means God is self-existent. Again, God is necessary. We are not. So God is self-existent, and that's something as we study moving forward, we want to understand that God is outside of time and space. He has nothing above him or nothing that he relies on for his existence. He also then bleeds into the attribute that God is eternal. You look at God's names. I was going to print all those out, but there's just too many for the page. But if you study God's names and look at how it applies to his attributes, Exodus 3:14, he is the I am that I am. Start applying. What does that really mean when God says it that way? He's making a claim in his name. John 5:26, the Father has life within himself. He doesn't need you to, he didn't create us because he needed us. The Father has life in himself. So we're looking at these arguments and you can see how you can start to parallel them to things that describe who God is from the Bible. This is the one I don't want to spend a ton of time on. 11th century Anselm is the ontological argument. And I am not kidding. You have to read this one. This is an argument from reasoning. Big brain, as my kid would say, my oldest would say, this is big brain work. But the core idea here is to find that the greatest conceivable being must exist in reality, because a being that exists only in the mind would be less than the greatest conceivable being. That's not coffee table talk. But if you, the first time I was exposed to this, probably right before I went to seminary, and I'm reading. Yeah, I'm like, well, this argument doesn't do anything for me at first. But the more and more you read it, it starts to gel a little in your mind. Again, I'm not going to lead off with this one, but it's the idea that if we can conceive of a God that's great, he must exist because, and it goes on, and believe me, this one has been going since the 11th century, and they are still debating it, and it is a very valid argument when you watch gentlemen debate this for and against the argument. Deep thinkers, so we're not going to go too deep on it, but you should be aware of it. And don't be afraid to watch, there's some things on Ligonier or other places. Don't be afraid to educate yourself on it. Because again, it gets interesting, but it takes some effort. This one I guarantee you're familiar with, even if you don't know the name. The teleological argument. You guys have heard of intelligent design or the fine-tuning of the universe? Well, if you look at the science views of things, chaos is where everything's at, and then order came from chaos. And we say that's not right. Where we see order, purpose, and complexity in the world, it indicates the existence of that intelligent designer. There's a classic example in all these textbooks, it's hundreds of years old, of if you're walking in the woods and you found a pocket watch. Everything about that pocket watch, from the shell that it's in to the gears on the inside, you crack that open, you know that this was designed with purpose and complexity. Very important thing. Now, I have two pictures up here. I could spend an hour easily on either one of these pictures. The fine-tuning of the solar system, right? If we move anything, it all falls apart. If the Earth was a few, little short distance one way or the other, it falls apart. The way the other satellites in space move around and the gravity affecting things, all of it would fall apart if it wasn't just where it needed to be. But that goes all the way down to things like our cell. And what you're seeing here is what's called the flagellum tail motor. 20 plus years ago, Christians would point to that and say, hey, look, this shows God exists. And science says, nope, that can't be. We'd say it's irreducibly complex. You can't evolve to this. It has to be. Nope. They say no. They would deny it. Well, you fast forward, how much more HD do we have now? I mean, we were doing black and white TV still. That is a actual CAD rendering of a flagellum tail. This is just a little tail on the end of a cell. This is just one part of a cell. And all these thousands of amino acids have to be in a certain way, and that is an electrical motor. It spins so many hundred RPM or thousands RPMs one way and stops, turns around, and goes the other direction. It's irreducibly complex, and this is actually omitting everything else that's around it that affects it.
I think this is the most compelling argument. It's called, the first one is called the fine-tuning argument, and it goes on and on. The shape of our Milky Way, the moon being where it's at. I mean, there's 50 dials that have to be like Mike said, almost exact.
Yeah.
And so if you can learn that alone, and then yes, now all of these microbiologists, the cell is one of the most complicated things, the single cell. And even now these biologists, these atheists are saying Darwin's theory is hogwash. It doesn't work. But I don't believe in God.
And these two things actually, now those forces of nature, those constants of gravity, the weak force, the strong force, all of that ties together. I was going to share this. Go ahead, Lou.
Yeah, just a little jump on what Walt said. I went to Oriole Park Schools in the 70s, and you're right. We were taught that the amoeba, the single cell is the simplest, simplest thing, and as technology advanced with microscopes and that, now you got this, and you're right, that whole argument is gone. Now they come up with something else,
Well,
they add more zeros to creation.
Well, what they they love to say is time.
Yeah.
Time and random chance. But now, Stephen Meyer, a doctor, he has proven in a book that the amount of time can't exist. It's way too much time, but he's proven that scientifically. And the last comment I'd make on this is it takes way more faith to not believe in a supreme being. Now, Mike's right, a supreme being, designer that created this, that does not prove the God of the Bible. Those are different arguments, right? But this proves if you're building your faith on Darwinism or chance or something else, you're an idiot.
Yeah.
You really are.
It's just a little that's so what I was going to say is, and I'll tie this together. That's just one little tail on a cell. What some cells only have one, some cells have numerous tails. Those cells, they used to think were just a blob, and then we get deeper and deeper, and now you see there's a city with purpose. Not only that, they can put a cell that has no brain, that has no sensory systems. They could put a cell in a petri dish and put the food over here, and it gets there. Cells, it's amazing. All that to say now is, you had something to throw in?
Yeah, I think the book you're talking about is Darwin's Black Box.
There's a bunch.
Oh, there's a bunch of books.
But it deals with this even to the RNA and deeper levels. So complexity, everything, the more we're able to see, the more complexity.
And that's what I'm going to say. So this is just that one piece, and then you have DNA, which consists of that code, and we're still learning, and we can't crunch the numbers fast enough. All that to say is, like, they will try to poke holes in that and say, well, time. They'll say things like, well, there's things in your body or things in nature that are just accidents and they're leftovers. Right? Mm-hmm. Like, they used to say, oh, well, your appendix has no purpose. Does your appendix have purpose? It does. Like, as we learn, it just exposes. Dew claws on a dog was a funny one, because your dog has thumbs they don't use. Well, they have to remember that the dogs we see today are all post-industrial revolution. My little white dog would not make it outside very long. But larger dogs, the Dobermans, they can climb trees with them suckers. That's all part of their balance system. Just like if you cut one of your toes off and you're going to need physical therapy, that's part of their system. It has purpose. So they're going to try to poke holes. And so you don't have to get too deep into it, because some of this stuff, if you ever get to that conversation, can be very compelling. But like Walt said, this is a good one to know. I don't find this the most compelling. This is the one that I find compelling. This is the moral argument. This one resonates. I mean, this resonates with a lot of people if you can have the conversation. It says that where there is a law, there must be a lawgiver. And this touches on the knowability of God, which is going to be next week's study when we get into that attribute of God. But it goes like this. Across the world, there are universal truths of right and wrong. All right? And anyone who tries to deny this, and we'll talk about it, they're delusional. There are universal truths of right and wrong. If they do deny this, they're going to have to give you all sorts of twisting of words. They're going to do all these things and come up with like a theoretical situation that doesn't reflect life. You're going to see this thing today in the schools and with the kids and in the media of your truth. Relativism. What's true for you is your truth, and maybe it's not what's true for me. This is a cancer. It's even just in everyday life, it's a cancer to have your own standard like that. So keep that in mind. Listen for relativism. You will hear people blatantly say, well, that's my truth. You need to look into that. It's even in our own minds, we've been influenced by it. But this moral argument says God's word, we're going to say that we are created in the image of God. That Bible in our heart, God's word is written on our heart to some level. And when you hear these arguments made, I say call it out in conversation. I say go for the jugular. Go right for it. Because it's the easiest thing to do. You can ask somebody about stealing. Do you want someone to steal from you? No. Someone stole our catalytic converter out of our driveway. I was very upset. People will try to make arguments. Well, what about the person who's stealing for their family to eat? Now, they're always going to throw a scenario out there to try to throw you off. You can keep pushing the issue. Ask them about rape. Is rape wrong? You have to say, well, yeah, it's wrong. Okay, well, it's a violation. Man, woman, child, young or old. It's universally wrong. We know it. It's written on our heart. And since there's a law, there must be a lawgiver. The argument then, when you kind of pin them down to this, and you'll hear professors talk about it, the laws of our land, the morality that we have is all part of our evolutionary process of mankind. It's all the things that we've come up with are the best for society. History does not show that. We don't have terms like raping and pillaging. The Bible shows it, right? You go and you take someone over, what they do? They drag people with them. That's the evolutionary process. That's what that worldview goes down to. You're going to see things in our world today if people are pushing this idea that there's relativism, your truth. If you're in missions, if you've had any study of other cultures, there's things happening in the world and here in the United States that are pretty dark, that are accepted by the cultures around them. Maybe not so much here, or maybe we don't say anything out loud, but you'll see that it happens. In certain countries, you're going to see that there's a huge sex slave trade of young boys in these Eastern countries where everyone knows about it. They can point to the places, but nothing happens. It's accepted at some level in that culture for whatever reason. Another one is, and this goes down to a family member of mine said, well, I don't like Christian missionaries who go and impose their faith on their culture and rob them, give them that colonialism or whatever they want to term that. Where we know the truth is that when we go as Christians to a place that has this darkness in it, we bring the law, which exposes sin, and then the gospel, which then shows them what God has done for them, and it changes cultures for the better. It brings about human flourishing. And I'm going to use a specific one like that. There's cultures in Egypt, Somalia, Iran, Iraq, Yemen, and America, we're on this list, where there's genital mutilation happening. Ritual genital mutilation. Our government has a point paper on the website. If you look it up, it happens so much in the U.S., there's a paper that they had to publish against it. So if you're having a conversation with someone, you can say, well, is it wrong in Somalia for them to mutilate their children? They're going to have to say yes, and if they say no, they're delusional. It goes with the same arguments for abortion, as you can talk through abortion. It's the same thing, but we have to have our doctrine straight on these things and know the reasons and how to get there. Again, so in this moral argument, we're trying to argue for the fact that there is morality, there are things that are right and wrong, and it shows that there is a lawgiver. It's hard, but what are we learning today in that sense? We have other arguments we can look at beyond these four. There's arguments from beauty. I might have wrote those down. There's arguments from beauty that you can look at, you can read on. The very nature in our minds that we can perceive objective, subjective beauty. There's beautiful arguments that show that there has to be a creator behind it. Arguments from consciousness. Human consciousness and rationality cannot be fully explained by natural process, suggesting a higher source. Great arguments for it. Arguments from desire. All these arguments are out there, and if we haven't thought through them and then start to apply those to the God of the Bible and see how the Bible describes these things, we're going to suffer a little bit for it when we try to make our faith compelling. All right, so when we look at today, we're going to start closing up here so I can have some time for people to discuss or have questions. But again, out of all of that, we've looked at a couple things in the idea that God is self-existent. So we have to remember these attributes. We're building a wall here of, this is our foundation blocks as we move on to other weeks. And so instead of just jumping right into his existence, we had to talk about the problem. So it's that big of a deal. Our faith makes no sense without a translator, and we need to serve as those translators, being able to show that a God exists. It's why faith matters. Revelation 1:8 tells us that he is the Alpha, the Omega, the God who is, who was, and who is to come. He's eternal. He doesn't relate to us in time. And next week, we're going to look at the knowability of God. There we go. That's how we end the class right there. So next week will be the knowability of God. And I promise from here, we're going to be much more in Scripture. But today, really, and many other systematic theologies will discuss all of these before they get to the God of the Bible, because it's that important. So, questions? Any questions or comments on some of